Hello and welcome back everyone, we Weeb online, and today I'm gonna continue the story What If Naruto Became the Guardian of All Creation Part 4. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a big thumbs up, and to watch more videos like this, subscribe to my channel and turn that bell notification on so you never miss an upload. Now wasting no more time, let's begin.
Invasion and 1-month break. Many Konoha residents regarded Naruto with mixed feelings. It was mostly a strange mix of fear, hatred, greed, and awe. Of course, Kyuubi found it hilarious to watch their emotions play out on their faces. While thinking of different elemental combinations in his head, the blonde black mage was on his way to the Hokage tower to ask the Hokage about where he could find Yamato. He was replaying what he felt when Gaara was fighting, and he swore he knew how the sand was manipulated. He moved the sand in a way that was both solid and liquid at the same time, innumerable tiny particles of sand working together to move like the wind but strike like a stone. When he thought about it that way, something clicked in his mind. His thoughts were quickly relayed to the plush doll in his arms, causing the doll to smirk at him. It appears that you discovered the truth about the sand manipulation. The blonde had to fight his instincts to either hug or jump for joy at the sight of the doll. Instead, he decided to crack a wide grin as he walked into the Hokage's office. The Hokage's office. Unfortunately, Sarutobi was in the midst of a meeting with a number of jounin who, like the other denizens, were experiencing a range of emotions. Hanko, Kurenai, and Kakashi were among them, but there were also a number of unknowns. Many of the jounin were concerned that the Kyuubi Jinchuriki was gaining too much power, angry that he dared to suggest that he was related to their beloved fourth, fearful that the village wouldn't be able to control Naruto for their own gain, and smug in their belief that they could force Naruto to teach the Uchiha. Hanko and Kurenai were standing in a corner, trying not to laugh at the swarm of demon-hating ninja in front of the Hokage's desk. However, Kakashi was at the front of the swarm. The door simply opened, and the blonde strode in with a beaming smile on his face, blinding many due to switching toothpaste brands to Guy to achieve the full youthful smile effect. The Hokage, who was accustomed to such smiles from Guy and his surrogate son, Apprentice Lee, recovered from the smile effects faster than others. The blonde waded through the crowds, his smile fading as he approached the Hokage's desk and asked his seemingly simple question. As the ninja finally got the spots out of their vision, the aged Hokage slipped the teen a piece of paper with Yamato's address and wished him a good day. Unfortunately for them, the target of their rage had already jumped out the window and teleported to the ground, avoiding their gaze. Unfortunately for the poor fruit vendor below, the demon child was on a collision course with his cart before being enveloped in a ball of fire that morphed into the visage of the legendary Kyuubi, scaring the poor man to death by heart attack. This amused both the Kyuubi and Naruto. Yamato's residence. The residence was rather plain, given that the XANBU was of Shodaime bloodline, and thus the council would have wanted to suck up to him. It was in the ninja section of the village, which had been separated so that non-shinobi wouldn't have to deal with the baggage that the ninja brought home. Bloodstained clothing, copious amounts of bleach to clean weapons and such, and the just finished with an assassination odor that tends to follow shinobi around are apparently not characteristics of a good neighbor. Who would have guessed? The blonde simply knocked and waited, observing the surroundings and noting a few ANBU following him around. He mentally shrugged, dismissing them but keeping an eye on them subconsciously just in case. When Yamato answered the door, he was met with an unusual sight. Naruto stood on his doorstep, the Kyuubi doll in the crook of his right arm, his hair tied back in a high ponytail. It was strange at first, until he realized why he was there. He ushered the blonde inside with a smirk, pleased that someone else might be able to use Mokyuten. Unfortunately for Yamato, the genetic engineering used to insert the Shodaime's Mokyuten bloodline into his cellular structure rendered him sterile, preventing him from having children. This was a rather amusing kick in the crotch of the bloodline Brownose Council, who had delusions of an army of wood-using ninja for a few days. The interior design of the apartment was rather Spartan. There was no decoration that did not serve a purpose, and every item in the house was used on a regular basis to maximize efficiency. The ANBU mask left on a hook next to the door was arguably the only decorative oddity, presumably for quick recovery on the way out. However, since he was no longer a member of a NBU, there was no real use for it, though it would make a good conversation piece. Yamato went into the kitchen to make some tea after asking the black mage to sit, leaving the blonde to his musings. When he returned with the tea less than 10 minutes later, he witnessed an interesting scene. Naruto had conjured a go board, with a dense, slightly glowing blue block of ice serving as the board. The black pieces were created through earth manipulation, using extremely dense obsidian stones. The white pieces were made in the same manner, but from white marble. Naruto was currently pondering his next move against an unknown opponent who had a slight advantage over him. When the plush doll snickered and declared that there was no way to win, the jounin almost dropped the tea set. After noticing Yamato's presence, Naruto banished the go board, muttering something about winning the next game. He sat back on the sofa, picking up the plush doll and seeming more amused than shocked or irritated that his doll had just spoken. The XANBU sat across the table from the blonde, with the tea in between them, and gave her an explained look. Would you prefer to hear the long story or the short story that covers all the main points? Yamato paused for a few moments before responding. Short. If you stay here for too long, the ANBU outside will start to get antsy, thinking you've killed me or something. Naruto scratched the plush fox's ears a little before launching into his story. The Kyuubi is not dead at all. Instead, I performed a ritual that removed him from my body and sealed him within the doll. I have complete control over his Yauki, and can control the size of the doll itself. I also control his every movement, making him a slave within his own body, but I give him freedom of movement, as making him a slave would be pretty cruel even by his standards. The Mokyuten user leaned back in his chair, massaging the bridge of his nose to try to avoid the headache he was sure was on its way. He quickly weighed his options and had a brief internal debate while Naruto entertained himself by floating globes of various elements above his head. He saw sea blue water, light green wind, vibrant yellow lightning, rich brown earth, crimson fire, light blue ice, and the beginnings of a beige-brown hybrid that resembled sand. He sipped his rapidly cooling tea, savoring the flavor as he reached a decision. As he opened his mouth, he had the fleeting thought, I just know this is going to bite me in the ass. I'll point you in the right direction and help you get started with the element. But after that you're on your own. I may have stunted my growth by learning from scrolls, and I won't let the element go to waste with you. He extended his hand and channeled chakra into his palm, using the stunned silence to demonstrate how he created the trees. A deep green glow enveloped his palm, condensing into a tiny seed-shaped sphere that solidified into a real seed. He placed his other hand over the seed and sent chakra through it, gently coaxing it to grow. He had a tree sapling in his palm less than a minute later, and he was breathing heavily due to the taxing nature of growing the tree slowly rather than forcing it to explode into growth. Before speaking, the blonde was deep in thought, staring at the sapling with a pensive expression. Can you only make that one type of tree with your wood element? The jounin had to fight the urge to slam face first into the ground when he realized the hidden question within the question. Can you create other plants with it? He replied, sheepishly scratching the back of his head. Well, yes, the tree is entirely composed of my chakra and given a solid form, so I don't have to carry seeds with me. I heard that the Shodai actually created the surrounding flora around Konoha, so I guess either he was really good with his chakra, or he had the seeds for it. One thought kept running through his head, why the fuck didn't I ever try to make different trees? The blonde nodded absent-mindedly before holding out his own hand, palm up. Surprising the jounin, a lavender glow formed around it, condensing into a purple seed. As the black mage carefully manipulated his mana to do his bidding, a bead of sweat appeared on his brow, the seed sprouting into a rather demonic-looking sapling. The bark was jagged and sharp, a deep violet color, and the leaves were sickly green. A few flowers had also sprouted from the young sapling, a fine green mist leaking from the seemingly innocuous white blossoms. The fox doll looked at the plant for a moment before bursting out laughing, proclaiming that he seemed to turn even wimpy flowers into lethal weapons. This assertion was bolstered by the fact that anything within 5 feet of the young sapling was subjected to a cloud of noxious green gas emitted by the blossoms. Yamato struggled to keep his jaw from dropping. The blonde had learned about Mokyuten by simply watching him grow a single sapling, and he managed to create some sort of super evil plant. Granted, the effort of doing something for the first time was taxing, but nevertheless, he struggled to keep from pouting at the injustice of it all, and resigned himself to the fact that if he could learn Hyuden in a month or so, he could probably learn Mokyuten in the same amount of time. Naruto had a message for everyone. I was looking for something man-eating, not something poisonous. At that proclamation, Kyuubi and Yamato slammed face first into the floor. Unfortunately, the blonde then began to coo and pet the rather dangerous-looking sapling, tickling the branches as if it were an infant. His amethyst eyes had glowed with what appeared to be motherly love. Yamato's heart would have stopped if he hadn't suffered a minor concussion from the face fault, causing him to feel as if he were dreaming. Kyuubi thought it was heartbreakingly funny. Reversing the growth process, on the other hand, was a bit more difficult to learn and required some thought. Yamato was currently incapacitated and dazed from the minor concussion. To create the seed, earth and water elements must blend and compress. Earth is the framework, the exterior, and the majority of it. Water is simply the veins and arteries that provide energy for growth, movement, and attack. To force it to grow, add more water to it and force it into all directions at once to ensure that the plant grows evenly. To reverse growth, all water would be drained back to the center, and the earth would be recompressed around it. The seed is nearly impossible to break open due to its incredible density, whereas the tree is much easier to destroy due to the fact that it barely needs more earth to grow. To change the plant type, I must put my intent into my magic, allow the mana to create it, and remember how it was formed so that I can recreate it later. The vicious purple tree flower seemed to implode, reforming into a seed in his hand before dissipating into its respective energies and being absorbed back into Naruto's body. After some thought, he decided to go for a vine that could ensnare and disable. The mana swirled into his palm, becoming a slightly brighter purple seed that began to grow at a reasonable rate into what could be described as ivy from hell. The vine appeared to be made of hundreds of plant tissue fibers that wove into each other, giving it the toughness of rope and an odd shade of cement gray. For lack of a better word, the leaves were quite sticky. Each leaf appeared to be about the same length as a kunai, though a little wider and a rather dull shade of slate gray. Naruto found it difficult to make one let go after gently prodding it with his finger, as the leaf actually curled around his hand and attempted to entrap it before backing off, sensing that it was attacking its master. Yamato had come out of his trance by this point, mostly because he had witnessed something strange. Naruto had apparently planted the vine on the plush doll, and it was now spreading quickly in an attempt to cover the entire room in order to catch the Kyuubi within its grasp. The doll was having a lot of fun outmaneuvering the vines and leaves, and almost seemed to pout when Naruto had to stop because he was tired of directing and growing the vines at the same time. The blonde wiped sweat from his brow before flashing Yamato a rare smile. Not just a twitch of his lips, but a genuine smile. The vines quickly retracted into the seed he had at the start, dissipating back into his body. After learning the fundamentals, he decided to leave before imposing more on his host than he already had. As he stood up and extended his hand to Yamato, he decided to repay a favor with a favor. You don't need to carry seeds around with you, though I'm pretty sure the shot I did. My plants may look otherworldly simply because my energy isn't chakra, though it isn't Yauki either. I'm curious how yours would look. Instead of forcing your chakra into molding how you see fit, try to project your intent into it as you create the seed. Yamato nodded slightly in thought before attempting it. He usually just projected the subconscious intent to grow trees, wooden bars, or wood house. It was never more specific than that, as he had learned from scrolls that never stated anything other than the techniques themselves. He repeated a mantra in his head this time to create a binding tree. The seed itself appeared to be quite mundane, but when it exploded into a young tree, it appeared to be quite different from his other trees. Because they were indoors, it was still quite young, but it appeared to be in the shape of a sakura tree. The branches, on the other hand, moved on their own and grabbed Naruto, pulling him towards the trunk where vines that resembled steel cables wrapped around his legs and arms. He quickly released the technique, blushing slightly in embarrassment that his creation had attacked his houseguest without warning, though the blonde only laughed. Your creation is rather good. Not many would think a sakura tree would attack them. However, you will most likely need to relearn control, as your new plants will most likely be unruly the first few times you make them. You remember the feeling you got when you made that seed, right? The Jounin smiled and nodded, pausing for a moment before responding. It's difficult to put into words. I wanted it to attack but not harm, and I didn't care how it manifested aside from the fact that it would incapacitate. Naruto's mouth twitched into a smirk before nodding. He cocked his head to the side before bowing to the Jounin, his amusement visible in his eyes. It appears that the ANBU sensed your chakra spike and are on their way here. I sincerely thank you for your assistance, and if I find others who can benefit from this, I will teach them in the hopes that the Mokuden element will never die out completely. I believe we both have training to get to, so I bid you farewell. With that, he snatched the plush doll from the couch and vanished into a black void. Just as the ANBU smashed down his door, Yamato turned to face the ANBU, noting that there were 4 squads, not just 1 or 2. His simple response was delivered in a deadpan tone. The door wasn't shut. Naruto spent the next 3 weeks holed up in his apartment, learning everything he could about the wood element, and mentally reminding himself that they should change it from wood to nature. He discovered a passion for gardening, which the Kyuubi would have dismissed as wimpy if he hadn't been tending to potentially dangerous plants. The Kyuubi's nature was destructive, and the creation of life did not appeal to him. The elemental automatons were fine because they weren't alive. They were more like puppets made of the elements to do Naruto's bidding. The plants, on the other hand, were fully functional. He'd spent 3 days trying to figure out how to transform them from mana constructs to real living things. He succeeded, but it took so much mana that he made a mental note that it was only for non-combat purposes, much like his self-sufficient flame that consumed no oxygen but burned forever in his never-melting frost. He imagined he could create an electrical charge that never lost power or a permanent wind. But he didn't want to risk it. The flame and frost were for Lulu's statue and were mostly decorative. Many people would want an electrical charge that never lost power, just to have a source of unlimited power for their homes and such. The constant wind would disrupt all global winds. At the very least, the plants would die eventually. He wasn't sure how long they lived, but figured he could reabsorb them if necessary. He was on his way to the Hokage's office because the old man required him for something. He stated that it was critical. The Kyuubi was currently out somewhere claiming to be looking for something. Naruto had asked the doll if he wanted his size increased, but he refused, claiming it was a covert operation, and instead requested that his color be changed so that he didn't stand out as much. The black mage had yielded, bending the light around the doll with his mana, causing light to appear to be absorbed into it, giving the doll a dull black appearance. The blonde had decided to change his wardrobe because he had grown tired of wearing the same outfit for so long. He'd decided to try to look completely androgynous because both the Kyuubi and he found it amusing when people mistook the blonde for a woman. He was now dressed in a black battle kimono with a gray obi and silver trim. The kimono itself was quite cleverly designed. The innermost layer was fine silk, with a middle layer of metal fishnet and an outer layer of an unusual but sturdy cloth. It passed several kunai tests, with the majority of the kunai having a slightly difficult time penetrating the first layer. Surprisingly, the kimono was easy to move around in, and he got the obligatory black mage sleeve effect because the sleeves were wide at the ends, ending about an inch past his fingertips. The kimono fell halfway down his shins, but it had slits up the sides to mid-thigh for ease of movement. His feet remained barefoot for silent movement, unaffected by tree hopping or other abrasive or rough terrain due to a fine, yet dense, layer of earth covering them that left no footprints when he moved. He dismissed the strange change in his appearance as a trick of the light or perhaps his imagination. His hair roots, which were less than a centimeter long, had turned a dead bone white color instead of the same golden blonde color as the rest of his hair. He chose to ignore the change because he was confident it would either reverse itself or reveal the cause before long. The Hokage's office. Naruto had bypassed the secretary for the day, instead teleporting directly into the office using an unusual shunshin. He appeared through what appeared to be a swirl of sakura blossoms, which was odd given that they weren't in bloom and sakura blossoms aren't supposed to be purple. Aside from the paperwork, which seemed to be grinning smugly at the Hokage, there were only 2 people in the office that day. The first was the Hokage himself, though he had a strange blush on the bridge of his nose and a conspicuous orange book was poorly hidden beneath some papers on his desk. The second person was quite tall, at least 6'2", broad-shouldered, and had a mane of spiky white hair that trailed down to his knees. He was wearing what appeared to be a unique Hidayate with the kanji for oil on it, and it appeared to have 2 blunted horns on it. He had a peaky skin tone, unlike the Sandame's tan brown, and this teleport apparently confused the 2 people in the office, as he had to clear his throat to break the trance. The taller man, who appeared to be in his 40s, approached him with a lecherous grin on his face and hearts in his eyes, attempting to smile winningly as he bowed and spoke. "How lovely. I have to put you in my books." A twitch formed in the blonde's left eye as he slowly turned his head towards the Hokage, who appeared to be somewhere between mortified embarrassment and incredible amusement. Naruto's voice was deadpan with a malice in it as he spoke to Sarutobi. "If he's important, Hokage-san, call him off before I kill him." The elderly Hokage coughed politely as he addressed the white-haired lecher, quickly regaining his dignity. "This is Naruto, Jiraiya-kun. He came because I summoned him." The lecher instantly turned a bleach-white shade of white and seemed to teleport to the Hokage's side in an instant, looking a little green. Naruto was unconcerned about the situation, and the twitch was still there. "You summoned me for a reason. Please elaborate." Remembering why he had summoned the blonde, Sarutobi shifted into Hokage mode, folding his hands on his desk and leveling a piercing gaze at the black mage before speaking in his authoritarian voice. "I'm Jiraiya, the Gamma Sennin. He wishes to assist you in your education, as he promised your father." The blonde's left eye began twitching uncontrollably, the only indication that he was becoming irritated. "Why exactly do I care? Minato was nothing more than my sire. He is not my father because he did not raise me. I have no idea where Kushina is, but if she isn't already dead, I'll gladly do the honors for her absolutely award-winning maternal care. I expected a mini Minato, dense, honorable, bright and cheerful, as well as a heart of gold. This is like an Itachi. Cold, calculating, deadly androgynous. The only indicators of him being Minato's son are the golden hair. The skin tone came from Kushina. In fact, the facial structure is from neither of them. He looks more like Minato. The Hokage finally noticed something while analyzing his new apprentice. Where has Kyuubi gone? Jiraiya nearly collapsed from the implications of that statement, and he immediately devised a method to check the seal. Kyuubi left, saying he needed to check on something. I expect him to be back in time for the finals. However, you interrupted my training, and I'd like to know why you felt it was necessary to do so. He wasn't supposed to be on good terms with the fox. And what did he mean by go and check on something and be back by the finals? Is the fox loose from the seal? Said the senin. Sarutobi rubbed his chin thoughtfully, ignoring his ex-panic student's looks, though on the inside he was cackling like a madman at his student's anxiety. Jiraiya is here to teach you. Isn't that correct? Finally given the opportunity to introduce himself properly, the Gamma Sennin immediately summoned a large frog and performed a little dance on top of it, complete with mysteriously appearing confetti and spotlights from nowhere. When the dance was finished, he noticed that the blonde was giving him a baleful glare that practically oozed "You waste my time." So he cleared his throat and reclaimed his dignity. "Yes, I promised your father that I would teach you toad summoning, among other things. You realize how difficult it is to find you. Apart from Sarutobi-sensei, no one seems to know where you live." The blonde simply glared at him again before speaking in a drawl. "The point of being a ninja is to deceive and avoid detection. The only person I have to answer to is the Hokage, not the council, and certainly not my idiotic teacher, who favors the Uchiha and plots to kill me when he thinks I'm not paying attention. The only person who needs to know where I live is the Hokage. I don't want to learn my sire's techniques because they aren't useful to me, and I believe in developing my own fighting style rather than copying others. Summoning is also worthless to me. It binds another being to my will and forces them to fight for me. I don't care if you say they want to fight, they aren't appearing of their own volition. While I don't believe shinobi must play fair, I do have a personal code of honor. If I'm going to fight, I'm going to fight on my own terms, not with the help of others. Is there anything else you require? Hokage-san." Jiraiya appeared uneasy as his perfect Naruto fantasy was shattered right before his eyes, but he still had one trump card. "I can teach you how to use your other chakra, Gaki. But first, I must inspect your seal." The poorly disguised attempt to see his non-existent seal irritated his jewel-like amethyst eyes. "Jiraiya-san, the seal has vanished. I don't have another source of chakra, and I don't use it at all. I don't use Yauki or demon energy either. I use something entirely unique. The more you try to soften me up, the less respect I have for you, because it is not only pathetic, but it also makes you appear haughty. If you have a question for me, ask it. If you have something to say, say it. Since you haven't been here in over a decade, I guarantee you won't be annihilated like Danzo, who tried to use me as a weapon for his knee force." Sennin blinked quickly before giving a mental shrug and moving on. "First and foremost, what happened to you? You don't have your parents' facial structure or eye color. What became of the seal? Why are you friends with the fox? Is it affecting you? How did you kill Danzo and still live? And how do you avoid using chakra?" The blonde smirked, his voice regaining some emotion in the form of amusement. "In chronological order, the village expelled me at the age of 3. And Hokage-san assumed I was dead, which nullified his law and allowed the children to be corrupted by the propaganda. Kyuubi instilled Yauki in my eyes and slightly altered my bone structure so I didn't look like a clone of my sire. I grew my hair to this length to stop it from spiking. At a young age, I performed a ritual in which I bound the seal into a plush doll and forced the Kyuubi's soul and Yauki into it. I could control him like a slave, but that would be cruel, so I let him run wild as long as he doesn't cause too much trouble. He's a fascinating person to know, and he helped raise me. He influenced me, but only by demonstrating the advantages of sadism against enemies, as well as the advantages of a good fight. I am not a destructive person by nature, though many will argue that my techniques prove otherwise. I killed Danzo in a show of power in the council room to force them to back down, and they respect that for the time being. I use a different energy that I will not discuss, and only a few people will ever learn about it. Is there anything else? The Sennin was left with only 2 questions. Why did the Kyuubi attack? And why do I still want to be your apprentice? I promised your grandfather. The slight tugging at the edges of the blonde's lips turned into a full-fledged smirk, his eyes twinkling with mischief and a hint of malevolence. To quote the Kyuubi, I was there, they were there, and I wanted to fight. I doubt I could learn anything from you, but you appear to be an accomplished ninja. Could I bounce ideas off of you? The Sennin had to stifle a snicker at the reason for such devastation. Sure, he'd lost his favorite student, as well as a sizable portion of Konoha's population, but it was still quite amusing. The past is the past, and hindsight is always perfect, so it's pointless to dwell on it. Do you think you can learn anything from me? Naruto turned to face the Hokage, his eyes twinkling with delight. Didn't you tell him anything about me? The Hokage simply shook his head no and puffed on his pipe. Before continuing, the blonde sighed in mock exasperation. With a single technique, I annihilated 300 hired mercenaries. The only thing that remained was a bloodstain on the bridge. There are no body parts. I have a good understanding of 7 of the 9 known elements and a basic understanding of the 8th. I can cause more destruction than the Kyuubi, but I need to rest afterward, whereas the Kyuubi destroys through physical force. Jiraiya was surprised at first, then spoke with suspicion. Show that you have control over the elements. I don't think I believe you. Naruto simply raised both hands together, palm up in a cupping motion. Before his body flared a light purple. 5 perfect globes, each about the size of a softball, began to rotate in a circle above his head. One was a deep sea blue, and rippled in a liquid manner. One was a rich brown, and looked like compact dirt and rock. One was a light green, and gave off slight breezes around it. At his heels, a tree sprouted and grew into a beautiful, if unnatural, sakura tree that towered over him by about 3 feet. The blossoms were black in color, the wood a pure white. Finally, an icy mist enveloped his feet, several spires of ice coalescing out of the mist. Both the Hokage and the Sennin were taken aback before the effects were absorbed back into the blonde, who simply smiled. I think that's proof. I still need to practice Mokyuten and learn Hyuten. Because I can't cause growth in an instant like Yamato, Mokyuten is only a third of the way done. Yamato, on the other hand, is currently relearning a large part of Mokyuten that he never discovered. How to create different plants other than the single species of tree he kept making. Finally, I need to learn how to manipulate sand. Badly, I only have a basic understanding of it from watching Gaara fight and figuring out how he does it without the use of an insane sand tanuki's yaki. That reminds me, Hokage-san, I believe there will be some sort of invasion. I saw Orochimaru in the forest, and he gave Sasuke some kind of perverted snake hickey. I believe Hokage-san sealed it, but according to him, the seal operates on the assumption that the seal has no power. If Sasuke believes he can obtain power from the seal, the containment is broken. With his warning delivered, he vanished in a flurry of flower petals, leaving only his address and a simple note for Jiraiya to flare his chakra if he ever visited so that he could disable the defenses. After a week, the final week was spent further training the Mokyuten, and Kyuubi had apparently found what he was looking for, a rather gothic tome that appeared to be in good shape, and the Kyuubi's answers threw him for a loop when he asked what it was and how old it was. It's an ancient text I never got around to reading that could be tens of thousands of years old. It has an enchantment on it to keep it from rotting with age. Looking at it, he decided to work on decoding it later, so he sealed it within a blood seal and added extra safeguards before sealing the blood-sealed scroll into his body. You can never be too careful with ancient artifacts. Today was the finals, and Naruto couldn't be more bored. He supposed he should be pumped and excited because the invasion would most likely happen today, but he couldn't find the energy to get excited about it. He figured if the invasion went poorly, he'd skip town and go check up on Itachi and Kasama. Maybe their leader would have news for him about his idea of joining. Maybe a cool hat with a mini hat for Kyuubi. The Konoha Chunin Stadium. The majority of the finalists were present, many of whom appeared nervous, a few of whom appeared to be dead men walking. And Gaara himself appeared to be bloodthirsty. Maybe it was just gas. When you only have a teaspoon's emotional range, one emotion tends to look like all the others. Sasuke hadn't arrived yet. Presumably due to extra training, many people who weren't blindly in love with the Uchiha heir expected him to make a dramatic entrance. Naruto decided to walk in slowly because everyone thought he was going to do some sort of awesome teleport thing. The proctor didn't even realize he was there until he coughed into his hand to draw attention to himself and show that he wasn't going to have any sort of special effects this time, which surprised quite a few people who were more interested in his change of attire. Many of the men in the audience mistook him for a woman, albeit a rather attractive woman. Naruto wondered if this was how Haku felt if he were a guy she looked androgynous enough. They called the first match after the obligatory speech of something Naruto kind of tuned it out. Nara Shikamaru versus Yamanaka Ino. Except for those two, all finalists had left the stadium. The proctor quickly called out Hajime before hopping back to avoid the two's crossfire. Ino appeared to have been training during the 1-month break, and quite possibly from Kurenai, given that Asuma was most likely playing Shogi and Go with Shikamaru all month. She did a few quick hand seals behind her back and whispered Genjutsu, Nai's no Kenkaio, which was accompanied by a wave of chakra as she began throwing kunai and shuriken at Shikamaru, who looked around in confusion before attempting to break the illusion. He retreated behind a tree, quickly forming the seal for his cage main no jutsu, the shadows stretching out to try to capture her. But she seemed to have improved her observation skills to detect Genjutsu easier, and was able to spot it and back off, quickly forming a bunshin no jutsu, creating 5 clones that took off in different directions to distract him. This went back and forth, with Ino casting perplexing Genjutsu, and Shikamaru attempting to outwit her and catch her with his cage main, until Ino used the majority of her remaining chakra in a last-ditch attack. Meijin. Jubakusatsu is a Japanese manga series. An illusionary tree sprouted behind the shadow manipulator, grasping him in the branches and preventing him from forming the seal to release Genjutsu, while Ino faded from view and appeared to emerge from the trunk above him, holding a kunai to his throat. Give up, Shika. You are defeated. The shadow nin smirked before stiffening, a shadow hand moving up her chest and around her neck. Kage Kyuubi Shibari no Jutsu is a Japanese martial art. Mendokyus, Ino, but it's a draw. At this point, the proctor stepped in and declared it a draw because they both had the other in a fatal position. Ino with her kunai at Shikamaru's throat, and Shikamaru's shadow hand in position to snap Ino's neck or choke her. They called out the next 2 contestants after a 5-minute break to clean up the strewn about weapons. Naruto, once again, walked all the way down, causing more people to sigh in resignation that he wasn't going to do anything flashy and awesome. Of course, when Sasuke failed to appear, they decided to give him 10 minutes to appear out of favoritism. Now that the crowd knew Sasuke was late, they focused more on his opponent's name for some reason. The name Namikaze seemed familiar, but they couldn't quite place it. Isn't it amazing how nobody knew who the Yondaime was? He was simply known as Konoha no Kiroi Senku or the Yondaime, and nothing ever mentioned his real name. They thought it was strange that Naruto, a masculine name, was given to an androgynous person, and was that a Kyuubi doll on their head. Finally, at 9:58, a highly dramatic Konoha Shunshin appeared, with excess leaves, and Sasuke standing back to back with Kakashi, both looking smug and proud of their achievement. Naruto yawned before speaking for the first time, and his deadpan tone easily carried up to the stands despite not raising his voice. The next time you want to be dramatic, perform a Shunshin that no one knows about. Half of Konoha makes a mess with the stupid leaves everywhere. Be thankful that the bigoted jerks care so much about your family name that they'll bend the rules for you, Sasuke. Otherwise, you would have been disqualified for being late, because nobody gets extensions. Sasuke, enraged that the dobe had ruined his awesome entrance, activated his Sharingan, showing 2 Tomo in one eye and 1 Tomo in the other, to which the crowd oohed and awed, clearly excited, and making the blonde roll his eyes again. Kakashi quickly teleported out of the arena and appeared alongside the rest of the Jounin senseis, smirking beneath his face mask. Before the battle began, the proctor called out Hajime. Naruto vs Uzumaki Namikaze Uchiha. Naruto, who was already bored with the match, threw the plush doll up to the observation deck, where it landed on all 4s and walked up to Ino, plopping down in her lap and seemingly oblivious to her shocked and slightly horrified expression. She may have been redeeming herself a little, but the thought of a moving, living Kyuubi doll still scared her. With the doll removed from the area, Naruto's magic was effectively limited, preventing him from casting Flare or Ultima and causing his magic to have less of an effect in the higher tiers. He quickly dropped into a ready stance and waited for Sasuke to charge at him. The Uchiha sprinted forward with his copied speed, easily surpassing most Chunin and coming close to Naruto's speed. Apparently, Kakashi copied Guy's speed and then let Sasuke copy it off of him, though his body couldn't fully benefit from it. They exchanged blows in taijutsu, with Naruto getting more hits in, though Sasuke did land a few rib-bruising kicks. A lucky shot, combined with Naruto's overconfidence, allowed Sasuke to land a heel drop on top of the blonde's head, stunning him for a moment. The Uchiha quickly used this moment to pull a scroll out of his kunai pouch, unroll it, bite his thumb, and perform a few quick seals before calling out a jutsu. Kuchios, Daten, Suiga no Jutsu. Several nin dogs dove into the ground from the scroll, Latching onto the dazed Naruto's limbs, his reactions slightly slowed by the head hit. He wasn't able to get them off in time before a Chidori plunged into the middle of his chest. As Sasuke pulled his bloodied fist out of the middle of his chest and kicked him away, the dogs puffed away in a plume of smoke, causing the blonde to slam into the ground. Many in the audience gasped, shocked that the last Uchiha would use an assassination technique on an ally, while others were still in awe that the last Uchiha knew such cool jutsu. The majority of the Konoha 12 were disgusted that Sasuke would use such a technique on a comrade, whereas Kakashi was nearly ecstatic that his plan was working. The demon was going to die. However, not everything goes according to plan. The blonde staggered upright, blood gushing freely from the wound that somehow didn't harm his vital organs, and coughed up a bit of blood. And Sasuke chose this moment to begin gloating about his victory. HMPH. Dope, you're not going to be able to beat me. I'm a Uchiha, and I'm familiar with Kakashi Most Sensei's prized jutsu. The blonde, on the other hand, smirked as he collected his mana, the purple haze surrounding his body and causing his blood-splattered hair to billow outward in the wind. Having not been tied back today, I'll admit I was overconfident, but you should have killed me while you still had the chance. I never expected to be forced to use this drain. As the purple haze exploded from his opponent, settling around him and pulling at something from within him, the Uchiha cried out in agony as a silvery liquid substance ripped itself from his chest and slammed into the blonde, visibly regenerating the damage until the only evidence that he had been harmed at all was the blood and the hole in his battle kimono. The jutsu, whatever it was, seemed to have sapped half of Sasuke's strength. As he tried to calm his breathing, the violent violet energy embraced the black mage once more, this time taking his time to summon a particularly powerful spell. In the cage box, Sarutobi was shocked that one of his ninjas would use an assassination technique on another ninja, cementing the accusations that Kakashi was attempting to kill Naruto. Orochimaru, disguised as the Kazekage, was almost salivating with delight at the Kyuubi Jinchuriki's unique jutsu. It harmed the enemy and healed the user. Genius. If only Kabuto were still alive, but no. It was a worthy sacrifice, and the reward for Kabuto dying was revealing that the Kyuubi Jinchuriki had Hyuden bloodline. Jiraiya, who was disguised as a regular jounin to protect the Hokage, was taken aback. He never imagined the Chidori could be survived. Then again, the Uchiha Gaki didn't really hit a vital area. In any case, he was astounded by the blonde Gaki's technique, which seemed more akin to something Orochimaru would employ, harming the enemy to heal oneself. Returned to the arena. The purple energy twisted and writhed around the blonde's body as the smirk on his face turned into a full-fledged maniacal grin. Ino, who had felt her Uchiha fangirlism shatter after what Sasuke did to Naruto, was surprised when the plush doll in her arms began laughing maniacally, and many of the ninja nearly fainted when it started talking. That Uchiha Gaki is about to get it. He ruined good clothes with his wimpy lightning thing, and now he'll pay. The blonde's energy explosion, lack of expertise, and lack of focus were the reasons for the long charge up and excessive energy. Mokuten, Habai-sanin no hentai. The flora formed a rather detailed clone of Orochimaru, though it was earthen in color and had a few twigs here and there, and the Kazekage was torn between being flattered and infuriated that the brat had the audacity to call that a representation of him. The Orochimaru construct walked forward, seemingly wearing only a pair of short shorts made of leaves, and slipped out a tongue-like vine dripping in sticky sap, wrapping Sasuke from head to toe in sap before unwinding and licking him repeatedly. While the tongue was doing its job, the construct's hands were tearing off the Uchiha's shirt and tearing at his pants, oblivious to the fact that it was drawing blood. The crowd was outraged, though Naruto and Kyuubi thought it was hilarious and laughed accordingly. The scene was actually so horrifying that nobody noticed Naruto had used Mokuten at all, and many spectators seemed to try to retreat into their minds to make the image go away. Orochimaru, disguised as the Kazekage, was once again torn between two emotions. He could be flattered that the blonde was reenacting one of Orochimaru's finest days, or he could be irritated that it wasn't him doing the licking. But a clone made of plants. Jiraiya stuffed his fist in his mouth to keep from snickering, while Orochimaru's bodyguards were sickened, wondering if Orochimaru-sama would do that to them next. Before the Uchiha heir could be stripped naked and molested by a living floral arrangement, the proctor called the match in Naruto's favor. If Sasuke hadn't been suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder and having flashbacks to when the real Orochimaru was licking him, he would have been furious at losing the match. Kakashi was understandably irritated that not only did Naruto not die, but that Sasuke was defeated. In Cage's box, Orochimaru, in a strange fit of emotion somewhere between envy, anger, flattery, and voyeuristic arousal, decided to call the invasion early so that he could collect his prize sooner. Unfortunately for him, Sasuke had retreated into his mind from the post-traumatic stress disorder, so he wasn't witness to the destruction of the invasion, though he would hear stories of it later. Then Shoja Genjutsu. Many Chunin were put to sleep, though all the Jounin senseis were still awake, as feathers rained down from the sky. Naruto, Shikamaru, and Ino were able to throw off the Genjutsu, Ino due to training, Shikamaru due to intellect and willpower, and Naruto due to sheer power as well as training and observation. The cage box literally exploded, and 4 Oto Nin formed a rectangle, projecting a powerful barrier that incinerated anything that came into contact, enclosing Orochimaru, Jiraiya, and the Sandaime. Naruto, seeing his opportunity, teleported up to where Ino was and landed right next to her with a small smirk. Demonic chakra suddenly flooded many shinobi's senses, emanating from Gaara, who was putting himself to sleep gradually to avoid too much of a shock to the system when the demon took control. Ino and Shikamaru were shaking heavily from the sheer malice and hatred carried on the heavy chakra, and if Kyuubi had lungs, he would be suffocating from the death hug. Both turned to face him with wide-eyed shock and awe, though it was Ino who spoke first. "What's the matter with him? I sense hatred, malice, and something strange coming from him. It feels like 2 people fighting for control in the same body, and the chakra is much heavier." Naruto yanked the doll from her grasp and helped both of them up before responding, his voice amused. "He is a Jinchuriki like I used to be. His seal, on the other hand, is brittle, so the demon is closer to his consciousness than mine was. He is handing over control of his body to Ikebai no Tanuki, Sabaku no Shukaku. Yauki causes the heaviness, not chakra, which is much more chaotic and thicker than human chakra. Shukaku's insane state amplifies his natural destructive tendencies, resulting in his malice and hatred. You two are accompanying me because I need to stop him, and you're safer with me than you are down here." Both gave hesitant nods before Naruto dropped the Kyuubi doll into the arena, enlarging it to the size of a small house, then jumped down, landing lightly on the doll's back and beckoning the two down. They both quickly squelched their growing horror at the fact that the doll was getting bigger and hopped down with him. Naruto was striking everywhere against the Suna and Oto Nins with various elemental attacks as the doll grew higher and higher, and he saw a 3-headed snake in the distance and launched a Thundaja at it. Several dozen lightning bolts arced from the air in front of his palm, taking off like a cannon and leaving a sonic boom in their wake, striking the 3-headed snake down with impunity and killing it instantly rather than returning it to the summon world. The demonic chakra finally exploded, and a 100-foot-tall sand tanuki stood a little ways out into the forest, cackling. Kyuubi, who was now about 120 feet tall, quickly bounded over to prevent the Biju from causing too much damage. Because of the nature of the battle, Naruto gave the Kyuubi complete control over his Yauki, allowing the fox to do whatever he pleased with it. He was too busy killing enemy nins with his magic, while Ino and Shikamaru were astounded by what they were witnessing, though they had the foresight to stick to the fox's head with chakra so they didn't fall. The two Biju attacked with a great roar, Shukaku using Futon, Rankuden and Kyuubi slamming into the Tanuki with everything it had. Several blasts of Yauki exploded out of the tails, as well as one concentrated beam of Yauki from the fox's maw as he tried to counteract the Ikebai's regeneration, who simply reformed everything. In Cage's box, Orochimaru took advantage of the distraction caused by the two warring Biju, and was able to score a direct hit with his Kusanagi no Tsurugi, Ku no Takai on the Sandaime, fatally poisoning him with the blade's constant poison. This, however, distracted Orochimaru as he paused to gloat, causing Jiraiya to launch a Game. Back to the Biju. Kyuubi had had enough of the annoying Tanuki's regeneration and decided that either the medium would wake up or he would vaporize the entire thing with an overwhelming blast of Yauki. Naruto gave a sadistic smirk and chose the hidden third option, pulling out a scroll with an intricate sealing pattern on it and teleporting off the top of the Kyuubi's head and onto Shukaku's. He backhanded Gaara hard to wake him up and dispel the Tanuki, then rode the red-headed boy into the ground like a cushion. The Suna no Yoroi absorbed the impact of a 100-foot fall, though it knocked the Jinchuriki unconscious. Naruto gave the equivalent of a mental shrug before activating the intricate sealing array on the large scroll, which placed Gaara into stasis and absorbed him into the paper, to be released and revived when the seal was activated again, or the scroll was destroyed. The invasion's aftermath was severe, but not as bad as it could have been. Most of the damage was property damage, though a few ninja and the Sandaime were killed. Orochimaru fled with his Sound 4, leaving the sword behind because it was too hot to pick up at the time, though he promised to retrieve it someday. Naruto knocked out Ino and Shikamaru, teleported them through a black void into the hospital lobby, and left Jiraiya a quick note. Jiraiya-san, I apologize for not staying longer, but I have done what I came here to do. I gave Konoha several months to redeem themselves from their crimes against me when I was younger, and they have failed spectacularly. If possible, please remove my name from the Konoha Ninja Register, otherwise, I will be labeled as a nuke nin. I resigned from Konoha. I've given up my surname because I don't identify with the Uzumaki or Namikaze clans, so if they're going to label me as a nuke nin, they should call me Naruto or Kuhai no Naruto. But I must say that the Sandaime redeemed himself before his death, and while I will mourn him, I am glad that he died in the heat of battle rather than from old age. With best wishes, Naruto. He did a quick mental check of his things to do in Konoha list. Name or kill Uchiha Sasuke. Irreversibly, horribly violated counts. Check. Horrify the entire council into submission. Learn Mokuten. Done. I caused the beginnings of a civil uprising by attracting several ninja to my side. Thoroughly scout Konoha for possibility of redemption. Check and fail. Extra credit. Capture of Ikubai no Jinchuriki. Possible second plush doll, though the insanity would become annoying. Perhaps soulless Tanuki doll is a symbolic trophy. Give Ikubai's soul to Akatsuki so that it can drive one of their members insane instead. Further extra credit. Liberate an ancient, magical sword from Orochimaru. Destroy the binding he has on it so that he can control it. Use it for yourself. If not, keep it on a bracket in the house for good conversational peace. Possibilities of changing sword shape into spork. Poison spork. Naruto could confidently say that he had a good time during his stay. With these thoughts in mind, he grabbed the Kusanagi and melted into a tree trunk, attempting his first Mokuten Shunshin, teleporting as far as he could ahead of Hunter Nin. He only needed to train ice manipulation, flora manipulation, and sand manipulation now. He expected Akatsuki to come after him once they learned of his defection, resignation, which he welcomed. He was dying for one of those hats. As time passes, Naruto needed a place to stay soon after his defection from Konoha. He nearly smacked himself in the face when the Kyuubi reminded him that he could make a place to stay. He set himself up at the border of Kei's no Kuni and Hai no Kuni, deciding that he might as well go for a flashy living training area so that Akatsuki could find him if they ever needed him. With Naruto, he hopped down from the treetop from which he was scouting, landing in the slightly grainy soil that marked the start of the transition from woodland to desert. The temperature was a nice medium between the pleasant forests and the scorching deserts, and he was close enough to both to train in. It was ideal. He quickly began constructing a training area, base, living area by destroying the surrounding forests and growing his own. As his dark purple energy expanded from where he sat in a lotus position, working on decoding the grimoire in his lap. It spread like a tidal wave, corrupting, reforming, and bending the environment to his will. With him at the center, it took him 3 days to finish his forest area, and it was quite impressive. The outer rim was a natural barrier made of tall, sturdy, sickly green trees that emitted poisonous miasma like fog. Anything that entered would die within minutes due to the potent neurotoxin contained within the miasma. For those who could avoid the miasma, the middle area was a jungle filled with barbed vines laced with potent necrotic venom. Beautiful, if otherworldly, ivory sakura trees with violet blossoms stood guard around the innermost area, the blossoms able to fire their stamens and pistils as darts at any mobile intruder. The stamens and pistils filled with yet another toxic poison designed to immobilize and slowly kill. The absolute center was a rather plain-looking house made of hardened and compacted earth with black frost roofing. The entire area was enveloped in an eternal twilight that was neither day nor night, light nor dark. After finishing the base, he retired for a well-deserved rest, having only deciphered the title of the book. The glyphs used as a language were constantly shifting and twisting, appearing to change constantly when viewed. Though once decrypted, the word or sentence remained in place. An Idiot's Guide to Undeaf. In Konoha, the council's reaction to the Jinchuriki's disappearance ranged from panic to shock to angry to smug. Some of the wiser council members had anticipated this and immediately pulled out matching folders of Operation Missing Jinchuriki. The wiser council member's spokesman was none other than Inuzuka Tsume, clan head of the Inuzuka clan. She spoke clearly over the general chaos of the council room, immediately silencing them. It is clear that the container has deserted Konoha, and thus must be marked as a nuke nin. We must send out the ANBU in collaboration with the Hunter Nin to hunt him down before he becomes too much of a threat. He should be detained if possible so that we can breed his bloodline into Konoha, or have his body brought back to be dissected so that we may learn how to replicate it. Before the council could roar in approval, Jiraiya appeared in the standard puff of smoke that denoted a shunshin. The Sannin began speaking as soon as he saw the folders indicating that they had been prepared for this. Before he left, Naruto left me a message stating that he resigned from Konoha's ninja register. But knowing that you will mark him as a nuke nin anyway, he asked to be known as Kuhai no Naruto, much like Sasori is known as Akasuna no Sasori. At this point, the council was understandably stunned. If they had simply appealed to his standards, they could have had the Jinchuriki all along. But that would entail both thinking something through and actually bowing to someone's demands. Blasphemy. Hyuga Hayashi stood up, his normally calm expression marred by a scowl. Or, by Hyuga standards, a scowl. In reality, it was just a slight downward tilt of his brows and a slight twisting of the edges of his lips, indicating a Hyuga sneer. Why would the village submit to a demon's demands? Jiraiya couldn't help but roll his eyes at the council's sheer stupidity, their normally sound advice twisted by over a decade of delusions about demons and their ilk. They appeared to be childish, refusing to consider the possibility that their beloved Yondaime performed the seal correctly, and the boy was not a demon. He was tempted to tell them that the demon they kept referring to was actually quite human, and that he had transferred the demon from his body and soul into the plush doll he always carried around with him. But then again, that would ruin the I know something you don't know fun and possibly break the tentative trust he had built with Naruto. In that case, he should try to use his spy network to find out where the boy had gone. With his appearance, he could create an entirely new character for his Ika Ika series. Of course, it'd be a female character in an orgy with a tentacle monster and a naughty ninja, but those details are irrelevant. He quickly left after the council decided to designate the missing Jinchuriki as an S-class nuke nin known as Kuhai no Naruto, effectively masking their displeasure at naming him something he desired. They claimed that the name was intimidating and would appeal to their desire to label him as less human and more demon. Naruto is back. After establishing his base, the Black Mage began serious training in the remaining two elements. He already had the form manipulation down for his flora manipulation, which meant he knew how to create different plants and trees. But he lacked Yamato's sheer speed. He intended to become even faster at creating plant life than Orochimaru's previous experiment. Similarly, he had to learn sand manipulation. He understood the concept as well as some of the practical application, but it could be used for so many things. It was similar to water manipulation, except it was both solid and liquid at the same time. Kyuubi became a good partner to bounce ideas off of while training because the fox had seen some interesting things in his days. Material concerns such as food and water were easily addressed, though the plants he created for food had an unusual flavor. If he had to describe it in words, he would say that it tasted like the aftermath of a lightning bolt striking sand. A delicious molten glass taste with a hint of grit, and a little bit of electrical zing to make it memorable. He wasn't sure why a plant would taste like electricity and sand, but he didn't question it. The fox would probably say something about how his mana was used more frequently to use lightning techniques in offense, and how his sand manipulation was used more frequently in defense, affecting his other techniques, though Naruto didn't want to put that theory to the test by eating a wind blade. He imagined it would be like chewing on razor blades, but without the metallic tang, and thus tasting mostly like his own blood, with a hint of spring breeze thrown in for good measure. He trained to exhaustion within his home, bringing all the elements that he controlled to their pinnacle of mastery. When he ran out of mana, he would pick up the Kusanagi and pluck at the various seals and bindings that Orochimaru had placed on them, devising a strategy to break the Sannin's grip on the blade. This went on for months, with him never leaving the protective embrace of his forest, completely cut off from the outside world. Meanwhile, back in Konoha, Uchiha Sasuke was furious. He was enraged, to say the least. He had most likely shed his Ice Prince demeanor by snarling in rage at random passersby as well as anything remotely cute and cuddly. What was the source of his rage? Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze, or Kuhai no Naruto as he was now known. The blonde daube had risen to the rank of S-class nuke nin, putting her on the same level as Itachi. And given that he didn't beat him in the exams, he was understandably irritated. How could he defeat Itachi if he couldn't defeat Naruto? Fortunately, he hadn't reached the point where he realized Naruto had limited his own fighting abilities and had almost defeated him with pure hand-to-hand combat, the Black Mage's worst skill. Then he realized it in the middle of the street, causing waves of concentrated angst to roll off him and making many pedestrians nauseated or dizzy. However, it vanished as quickly as it arrived, and waves of concentrated smugness began to radiate in its place. These had the strange effect of causing many girls ranging in age from 8 to 80 to squeal at the top of their lungs and charge at the Uchiha heir. It's quite creepy when someone your grandmother's age yells, "Sasuke-kun, I want your babies." Tugen and Kunoichi in training, on the other hand, were unaffected, looking on with a detached air of disgust and shock. Yamanaka Ino and Tenten watched in awe as the Uchiha was swarmed by hordes of women. They sighed in unison and continued walking right into each other. Picking themselves up off the ground, they realized they were the only females in a large area who weren't affected by Sasuke's presence, and they struck up an odd conversation about it. Halfway through theories about how Konoha's youth were brainwashed by their parents into wanting to create Uchiha babies through the skilled use of a tape recorder, and hypnotic recordings played back during sleep, they broached one of the most trap-laden topics of discussion ever: kunoichi instruction. Tenten, for one, didn't see the point in learning how to properly arrange flowers of all things when it's never used. If they needed it during a mission, they could easily buy a book on the subject and study it. It didn't take years of practice to properly arrange a bouquet. Ino, who worked in a flower shop, contended that there is more to it than just arranging flowers in a specific pattern. She went on to say that there is a whole subconscious message played through the flowers that is fundamentally identified by the receiver, who will always know even if they don't acknowledge it consciously. But even after she said it, she didn't believe it. After discussing how kunoichi training differs from shinobi training, the two came to an unusual conclusion. How come we don't get the same training? If a jutsu can change your appearance through an illusion, couldn't it also change your gender? Then, instead of a kunoichi, a shinobi could be sent on a reconnaissance mission. This allowed kunoichi to participate in shinobi training and shinobi to participate in kunoichi training. Jiraiya, who was still an apprentice and had been ordered by the Honored Council to find a replacement for the now-dead Hokage, came across them as they were discussing how women can fight and how men should learn seduction and flower arranging just like women. After all, some women don't understand it as well as some men. Hearing their heated debate, the Toad Sannin reached an immediate conclusion. He'd take these two to meet Tsunade, as they might be able to persuade her to return if they told her all about how Konoha was messing up kunoichi training. Even if that didn't work, he could still assist in their training. After all, he still lacked an apprentice, was getting on in years, and needed to pass on the Toad contract. Naruto didn't want it, and he assisted these two in their training, so perhaps one of them. He had to deal with a hero-worshipping Ino and Tenten who had learned exactly what the Slug Sannin could do with just one finger after a quick explanation of why and where they were going. He quickly obtained permission from Yamanaka Inoichi, the Yamanaka clan head, and set off with the two kunoichi to the last known location of Tsunade. He didn't miss Tenten's wistful smile or the slightly cloudy look in her eyes when they met Ino's father and discussed the possibility of adopting the girl since no one else had expressed an interest. Normally, he'd take the scenic route, stopping at as many bath houses as he could along the way. But the way Tenten girl kept fondling her kunai, shuriken, and other pointy objects made him think perversion wasn't a good idea. Tanzakugai. It had only taken them a week to track down Tsunade, which was strange considering she was a Sannin and knew she was being pursued. Someone who was wanted by both debt collectors and dangerous ninjas would have thought to cover their tracks a little better. Jiraiya discovered several copies of Ika Ika Paradise and Ika Ika Tactics in Tenten's backpack during the week it took to find her. When asked about the books, she explained that she had started reading them whenever Neji gave a fate speech or her teammate, and Sensei were having a manly moment. He didn't tell her he wrote the books, however, because the research required to write such a masterpiece was dubious. Tsunade was already considerably sloshed in an average bar when they found her, ranting to a small pig wearing a red jacket and a beaded necklace about how the casinos were ripping her off. A woman no older than 20, with short brown hair and dressed in a kimono, wrung her hands in anxiety and asked Tsunade-sama to stop drinking because she was already quite drunk. This scene was a real eye-opener for Tenten and Ino. It demonstrated that, no matter how revered their heroes are, they are still human, with human vices and habits. Tsunade's current state of inebriation demonstrated that she was just as flawed as they were. This, of course, reduced their hero worship, but they still admired her strength despite her alcoholism. To be honest, if a woman can shatter a boulder with her finger while sober, imagine what she would do if she was an angry drunk. Respect goes a long way toward living a longer life. Jiraiya sat down on the opposite side of the table from Tsunade, where the Toad Sannin immediately went into serious mode. This was a variation on the Hokage's authority mode, also known as mission mode, and consisted of him staring at his former teammate and steepling his fingers in front of his carefully blank face, trying hard not to let his gaze stray to her feminine assets. Tsunade appeared to be miraculously sober, demonstrating her medical superiority. Even for a medic nin, going from shit-faced drunk to post-hangover sober was a remarkable feat. Tenten finally spoke up after the Slug Sannin spewed a hate rant of the title after listing that they wanted Tsunade to return to Konoha as the Hokage. While I respect you for being the most notable kunoichi in recent history, it is rather unfortunate that you will not return to Konoha. I would have thought you would have considered all the different changes you could make, including those to the hospital and the kunoichi training, instead of constantly thinking about all the village has taken from you. At this point, Ino spoke up, picking up where Tenten had left off. We have a theory that the council tried in brainwashing the younger generation into loving the Uchiha heir by using hypnotic messages in our sleep. And the only girls who aren't currently trying to rape or seduce him are Tenten, Hinata, and Tenten is one of the few unadopted orphans and thus wouldn't have been hypnotized. And I got my delusions shattered rather horribly in the Jiraiya and Tsunade were both shocked and horrified by this, as it explained the phenomenon that had seemed to affect Konoha. Tsunade had to pause for a moment before slipping into her own version of the serious mode. This effect was lost on Jiraiya, who got a good look at her cleavage as a result of the maneuver. His hand crept forward almost uninvitedly and the only warning was a large twitch in Tsunade's left brow before Jiraiya was ejected from the bar with a chakra-enhanced fist, blowing a man-shaped hole in the bar's wall as well as a similarly shaped hole in the wall behind it. Despite the fact that it was a genjutsu, the flesh looked real. Tenten and Ino were torn between laughing at Jiraiya's bravado, being shocked at Tsunade's power, and being outraged at the public display of lechery. Despite the fact that Jiraiya had put the moves on her, she had agreed to become Hokage in order to chastise the council for allowing the village to fall so far. She would still mourn for her deceased brother, Nawaki, and her lover, Dan, but she would make certain that no one else had to go through the same ordeal. Tenten glomped Jiraiya with a Cheshire grin after learning who wrote Ika Ika and asking him where he got the inspiration for scene 14 of Ika Ika Paradise, Twins in Paradise. After reflecting on her life thus far, Ino asked Tsunade if she could learn some medical skills from her, as she was unable to help her teammates at the moment. She also promised to tinker with her clan's techniques in order to make them more effective in frontline combat. Tsunade accepted her as an apprentice when she demonstrated genuine dedication to the field of medicine, despite the fact that Ino had expressed a desire to be able to fight in combat, as well as work in a hospital. Jiraiya inquired about her training with the creepy spandex guy after learning that the pointy weapons girl was okay with his riding. After considering the information she provided, he came to the rather interesting conclusion that she required ninjutsu knowledge in addition to weapons. She also needed to learn how to fight in close quarters with or without a weapon, so she took her on as an apprentice while also unofficially becoming her father figure. Gamabunta was ambivalent about his new summoner being a woman and frustrated that she enjoyed reading hentai novels as much as Jiraiya did writing them. Gamakichi thought it was cool that she could throw pointy things so well. The strange group proceeded to Konoha, where, unbeknownst to them, Sasuke had defected while the council was too preoccupied with a phantasmal threat, Naruto. While the council was in DEFCON 4, powerful individual with a reason to hate Konoha, Uchiha Sasuke devised an ingenious plan to flee to Orochimaru for training. The man may be an effeminate, snake-jumping pervert, but he clearly knew what he was doing if he could kill, and then imitate the Kazekage without the Hokage knowing. True, he'd have to deal with the rapidly fading voice of reason in his head, but it'd be silenced soon enough. After all, no sacrifice is great enough to gain the ability to kill his brother. Kakashi and his methods be damned. The Chidori had obviously not killed the blonde dobe, so how could it kill his brother? Shikamaru could be proud of his plan. He sent a clone into a public place and declared that he wanted a date, forcing the women to compete in a bikini mud wrestling match to see who would date him. The ensuing riot caused all nearby ANBU to disperse. Then again, they were having too much fun watching to separate the women. Who knew a commoner could bend like that? So Sasuke, with only his clothes on his back, followed the directions to Orochimaru right out the front gate. It would take the village 2 weeks to realize this, because fangirls seemed to always file missing person reports whenever the object of their desire was out of sight for more than 45 seconds. After all, couldn't he have been kidnapped to keep him away from the lovely and desirable insert name here? With all of those, the reports tended to become quite clogged. Only when Kakashi stormed into the council room with his Sharingan ablaze, demanding to know where his pupil had gone, did they believe he was truly missing. Tsunade arrived the next day and announced that she had accepted the position of Hokage. The Slug Sannin immediately dispatched Ino and Shizune for a few cases of sake, sensing that the first issue would be a massive headache that would necessitate copious amounts of alcohol to alleviate. They marked him as a C-rank nuke nin to be captured or persuaded back to Konoha on sight. If he had been kidnapped, the kidnapper would have demanded a ransom or even gloated to equally nefarious other villains about plotting Konoha's demise now that they had a male specimen of the infamous Sharingan bloodline. After a year, it had been a year since he had left the peace and quiet of his forest. He hadn't felt the warmth of the sun on his skin in a year, and he'd happily vanished into the twilight rapture of his forest. When it came to elemental control, he had achieved a level of mastery previously unknown in the elemental countries. The elements could now respond solely to his thoughts and whims, and he had to forcefully restrain the sand and ice from creating beautiful abstract sculptures whenever he waxed poetic in his thoughts. His appearance had also changed significantly, becoming less humane, less approachable, if he could put it that way. His hair had almost completely lost its color, with several golden blonde streaks running through the bone white. If he systematically counted the number of blonde hairs in comparison to the white, he'd get 1 blonde hair for every 4 white, give or take a few strands. His skin, which still clung to the golden bronze, had been affected by the lack of sunlight, and had paled slightly in comparison to its previous radiance. His eyes, once sparkling amethyst-cut gems, had begun to glow with an inner light, emitting an eerie purple glow when embraced within the darkness. It irritated him now and then that he couldn't rely on his sight in the dark because it would reveal his position. But he'd learned to live without it if necessary. He had grown slightly, reaching his maximum height, though his body would fill out a little more before he was finished growing. He stood proudly at 6'0" and his hair was cut to his waist after an interesting revelation that it had stopped spiking once the lifeless white hair became predominant on his scalp. He was barefoot and dressed strangely. He had discarded his previous battle kimono near the end of his training and made his own clothing out of one of the most durable and adaptable elements. His pants were a flowing set of royal purple-colored hakama, crafted out of uniform grains of sand to create a smooth feeling rather than the roughness sand normally creates. His torso was covered by an elegantly crafted black haori, shaped from the same sand the hakama were. He paused for a few moments on the outskirts of his base before releasing the magics that bound the unnatural constructs to the material plane, allowing the house and the multilayered woodland that protected it to dissipate into their inherent energies. He smiled as he continued on his way, a strange plush fox toy with 9 tails slumbering peacefully on his left shoulder, somewhere in Aim no Kuni. This was not what he had anticipated. He was expecting some sort of underground fortress with intricately laid traps, explosion tags decorating everywhere, several places requiring an elaborate password, and a convoluted maze to the throne room where one could easily become lost and starve to death. Naruto had no idea he'd arrive in Aimdakure no Sato, ask for Akatsuki, and be led to something resembling the Hokage Tower, albeit with only 2 stories instead of 4 or 5. When he was led through a rather average hidden village, he began to suspect he'd gone to the wrong country. Perhaps they were stationed in Kei's no Kuni, Mizu no Kuni, or even Yuki no Kuni. Surely Akatsuki wouldn't be so careless to allow random. The guide took him all the way to the doors labeled Aimkage, and told him that the boss wasn't having any meetings and to come right in. He gave the door a light knock, deciding he might as well go with the madness, and gained entry after a deep voice bid him to the office of Aimkage. Naruto wasn't expecting to meet the leader of the Akatsuki in person, but he carefully opened the door and let himself in, closing it behind him, his senses on high alert that this was some kind of trap, trying to get him to lower his guard before striking. All he saw was a bright orange-haired man with multiple piercings through his nose, ears, and bottom lip, dressed in standard black shinobi pants, standard black shinobi sandals, a long-sleeved black shirt, and a scratched aim hidaide upon his forehead, and a high-collared black cloak with red clouds indicative of an Akatsuki on the wall near his desk. The man lifted his head from a report he was reading to look up at him with a rather strange set of eyes, slate gray, but with multiple concentric circles in them that had an almost hypnotic quality, not as good as the Sharingan at hypnosis, but definitely enough to make a casual observer slightly uneasy. When the strange man, who couldn't have been more than 25 years old, saw him, his mood brightened a little and the rain stopped outside. The man gave him a curious look, obviously noting that he wasn't wet at all, regardless of the rain outside, and spoke in the same deep tones he had heard from outside the door. "Are you?" Before speaking, Naruto gave a slight smile and bowed at the waist to show respect for the other. "My name is Naruto, though most people call me Kuhai no Naruto or that demon brat. I am the Kyuubi no Kitsune's former Jinchuriki, and I would like to join your organization. If that is not possible, please direct me to the nearest location where I can purchase a hat similar to Itachi's." The man gave him an odd look, as if he thought it was a joke or he was insane, and the corner of his lip twitched slightly before replying. "My name is Pain. There are currently no open positions within the organization because we have yet to recover Orochimaru's ring." Naruto tilted his head to the side, puzzled, before forming an enigmatic smile on his lips. "How durable are the rings, Pain-san?" The orange-haired man blinked quickly at the perplexing question before carefully phrasing his response. "They have survived incineration as well as the bearer's explosive clone suicide without being harmed." "Why?" The black mage smiled inexplicably, and the next few words shocked Pain to his core. "I think it's about time I paid the Otogakure a visit. Do you think I should make it more appealing, Pain-san? I hope you'll join me on this trip. I'm sure there'll be a lot to see. After all, it's not every day that a village vanishes from the map in a single day." Pain pondered this for a few moments before pressing a button on his desk and informing the secretary that there would be no more meetings. He pulled on his cloak and motioned for them to leave, quite fascinated in this rather remarkable individual. Naruto kept walking, the same strange smile on his lips as the two took to the trees, speeding towards Otogakure no Sato, Oto's siege. Naruto and Pain landed nearly 100 meters from the forest's end, where it gave way to plains. Pain was taken aback by the sudden stop and raised an eyebrow at the white-haired teen in silent question. As he crouched low to the ground, one palm flat on the ground, the black mage's lips quirked up in a wry grin. The land rumbled in defiance of the unspoken command, but eventually yielded to the mana's constructing force. Within a few moments, a rather large insect had formed entirely of soil, clay, and bits of root and other matter caught in between. It appeared to be a frighteningly large wasp, easily over 6 feet tall, with 4 wings instead of the usual 2. It was vertical in posture, with its body curved so that the stinger was positioned forward, and hovered with an oddly soft buzzing noise, considering how much it had to weigh from being made of rock. Its sharp mandibles snapped once or twice, as if to test their strength, before turning its head towards Naruto, soulless yellow compound eyes staring back. Pain was watching both insect and master with caution at the moment, as bugs were one of his greatest fears. Anything with an exoskeleton and a penchant for getting into awkward situations irritated him, and this was a prime example. Unfortunately, his sandals were too small to squish this one. Perhaps he should ask Conan to make a sledgehammer-sized paper fleecewater to squish it with. Strangely, Naruto approached it and ran a calm hand over the wasp's head, eliciting a strange higher-pitched buzzing before speaking. "I need you to capture someone named Karin. She should be working in the village laboratory or infirmary, and is usually wearing a white lab coat, knee-length khaki shorts, a white sleeveless top, and glasses. Her hair is burgundy in color, and she wears it with one side long and straight, and the other short and choppy. If necessary, sting her to paralyze her and bring her back to me." The wasp, strangely, nodded its head before sinking into the earth. The white-haired adolescent smirked slightly before returning his gaze to the suspiciously empty open plains ahead of them. With a low chuckle, he twisted his hand in the air, summoning a miniature swirling tornado. The storm collapsed in on itself, forming a new shape and containing the chaotic winds. It soon calmed down, the previously unrestrained element chained into the shapes of a small puppy and a fluffy kitten. They were a sandy brown color with lifeless blue eyes, unlike their earthen insect counterpart. They both looked up at their leader, heads cocked to the side in question, prompting the black mage to kneel down and stroke their fur as he relayed his instructions to them. "Wander throughout the village below us and tranquilize and capture any child the age of 11 or under, and bring them back to me as soon as possible, without being seen or caught. Feel free to simply allure them instead of outright attacking them, if at all possible. Go." The two nodded in unison, creating an unsettling image for the onlooker Pain, who was certain that soulless automatons would be added to his list of things to destroy on sight. Naruto took a step back and began walking in a large circle, easily 500 meters in diameter. After receiving the orders, almost all of the trees near and inside the circle were uprooted and moved out, replanting in other areas and clearing a large grassy area. Following in his footsteps, a single blade of wind carved an unwavering line, clearly defining the area's boundaries. As the wind blade finished carving, it dissipated back into energy, leaving a mark over a foot deep and 2 inches wide in its wake. He took a step outside the circle and leaned against a nearby tree to rest his eyes after the brief exertion. He knew he'd have to do a lot more work soon, so he savored every moment of rest he could find. Pain, on the other hand, had other plans and approached him, clearing his throat before asking the most pertinent question that came to mind. Wait, what the fuck? One amethyst eye opened lazily, gazing apathetically at the orange-haired Akatsuki leader before closing. He spoke up from his slumber, his voice devoid of inflection. Karin will be able to tell me the exact number of people who do not want to stay in Oto, as well as where they are. I refuse to kill those who do not deserve it, which is why the children are being evacuated. The circle is to place the refugees during the fighting. I will protect them once they are all within the circle. Pain blinked quickly in surprise at the idea that one person could protect an entire village's refugees while standing right next to the fighting. But let it go for now. He would, however, get his answers, just as soon as he got the image of the giant wasp out of his mind. They stood there for nearly 15 minutes in somewhat companionable silence before the ground rippled and split, as if a large bubble had been forced to the surface of a lake, exposing the wasp and the medic Nin, Karin. The red-haired woman appeared to be only in her late teens and was around 5 feet tall, with the wasp's 6 legs clasped around her arms and chest, preventing her from making hand seals or grabbing for a weapon, and yet she seemed quite calm. She alighted her red eyes upon the white-haired black mage and raised one eyebrow quizzically, keenly observing him as a potential threat. "Are you the one who kidnapped me?" Naruto's lips twitched upwards in a slight smile as he rose from his seated position to a standing position to respond. "Yes, I'd like to make a request and ask you a question. Which do you want to hear first?" Before she spoke, the med-eyes Nin's narrowed in suspicion, her arms tensing in preparation for a fight. "The inquiry," he replied, not even batting an eye at his captive's rigidity. "Are you happy working for Orochimaru?" The question caught her off guard, and her eyes widened in surprise before narrowing again in suspicion. Trying to move an arm discreetly, she realized the insect had her quite constricted, so she gave up on that avenue of escape for the time being and answered. "Orochimaru-sama has helped me advance in my studies as a med-nin, possibly surpassing his late servant, Kabuto." Before repeating his question, the black mage's eyes glinted with slight amusement. "All right, that's fine, but do you enjoy working for him? Your response will determine whether your life is measured in decades or minutes. Will he really kill her? Who was he, anyway, to ask about Orochimaru like that?" She began to channel her chakra to try to strengthen her muscles in a desperate bid for escape, and spoke the answer she hoped would throw him off long enough for her to attack. It didn't hurt that it was the truth, either. "No, he is a nightmare come to life, using human lives as pawns in his sick and twisted experiments. The only thing I can do for my patients is try to make their deaths as painless as possible, and to lace their injections with painkillers to alleviate some of their suffering." She thrashed for a brief moment in the grip of the insect, which had yet to tighten its legs around her, cracking the earthen formation of one of its legs before being subdued by laughter. Pain, who was hiding in the trees, looked up at the strange sound, which was almost musical, but not quite the thing to hear from an S-rank nuke nin. He might have to deduct points from his application, for that nuke nin are supposed to have maniacal laughter, not musical laughter. Naruto regained control of his laughter and broke out into a wide smile, showing off his teeth as the plush doll within his arms grinned in unison at the stillbound mednin. "Good. It appears that you will not die at my hands today. Now, Karin-san, may I make a request?" The redhead could only nod numbly in shock. She had been spared by a supposedly merciless nuke nin. Before she could process that, he spoke again. "I need you to use your ability, which has been noted in the bingo book, to find chakra signatures that emit certain emotions. I'm looking for resentment, hopelessness, and hatred in a combination that is characteristic of people who are forced to stay in Oto or stay only for fear of their lives." Karin blinked quickly before tilting her head to the side, reanalyzing the teen in front of her, as she clearly hadn't heard that correctly, and he repeated, "I want you to look for people within Oto who do not want to be there and are being held against their will, or who only stay for fear of being hunted down and experimented on or killed." The word experiment jolted her out of her reverie, and she seemed to realize something, so she spoke up, her voice full of determination and steel as she tried not to get her hopes up. You're going to save them. How? I'll do it if you have a good chance of success. Anything to assist them. She was hard-pressed to either crack up in hysterics or break down crying in despair that her savior was a lunatic after outlining that he would be protecting them while laying siege to the village itself. Until, of course, he responded that it was quite easy for him to create the automaton which had captured her without being sensed at all. Then she started taking him a bit more seriously. They are wind and air creations, able to disperse and reappear at will, carrying others with them. The wasp was an earth and rock creation, capable of melting into the planet and transporting others through the soil. After finally agreeing to the plan, she assumed the standard chakra gathering stance, one hand forming a ram seal as her eyes closed. To others, she appeared to be meditating, but everything changed from her perspective. The world faded away, leaving only beacons of energy lighting up the void. The compressed sun of Naruto was almost blinding to her senses, the violet light almost obscuring an entire village of ninjas beneath them. But she was able to avoid it. She scouted along the glowing blue orbs of the village of Oto, tapping each one with her senses to feel the emotions emanating from the beacons. Opening her eyes, she realized an hour had passed in the real world as a result of going through 8,000 chakra signatures, and she stretched out as she strode up to the black mage, making sure to mark the chosen ones in her mind for later viewing. He had his eyes closed and held both arms in front of him, about a foot apart, as several spheres of colored energy slowly rotated around his head. He paused the creation process when he noticed Karin approaching him, and tilted his head politely in greeting. Await. Then 250 are worth saving. The rest have made the decision to be protected by a human abomination. If they choose that form of protection, they deserve their fate. The children have all been evacuated and will be awake in half an hour. Please wait a moment while I create chauffeurs for our new refugees. He shrugged obliviously as he stomped the ground with one foot, causing a battalion of 100 stone wasps to emerge from the earth. Pain was shaking in the tree he was sitting in, alerting Karin to his presence, resulting in her rounding on him and casting a sealless Kaneshibari no Jutsu by lowering her glasses and glaring at the Akatsuki leader. He beckoned Karin and Pain to follow him as he stepped into the ground ring, careful not to brush the edge itself, which was copied by the other two. He sat down with a slight smile on his face, waiting for the children to awaken. Kun, how many soldiers should I make from the other elements? I want to make certain that it is not a total slaughter. The fox laughed, surprising both of the other nins before speaking up. I'd say 50 of each element, primarily for supporting fire. You and I, brat, will be the driving force. Before speaking up again, the white-haired teen gave a menacing laugh. Are there any constraints you'd like to impose on this siege? The doll grinned widely, exposing all of its sharp teeth. Neither of us used more than 40% power, not counting the soldiers. Naruto chuckled lightly before supplying his own, launching a ping-pong battle of regulations. No form taller than 10 feet at the shoulders. No forbidden abilities until Orochimaru appears. No using your own Yauki as a high-powered beam. Why? You can use that to cut through the Hokage monument. Because the bodies would be vaporized, it would be difficult to tell how many you killed. That's an excellent point. There will be no absolute murder to the point where they are no longer alive. There will be no on-site torture for answers. It would have a negative impact on the kill count. What should be the final attack? Ooh, I'm having an out-of-this-world thought. Karin and Pain were both stunned through shock and disbelief at some of the rules that they were implementing. Rules for a siege. How bizarre. The ground rumbled angrily, waking up some of the children, who looked around, perplexed and terrified, as 100 enormous earthen wasps emerged from the ground, carrying 2 to 3 passengers each and dropping them into the circle before sinking into the ground. The mana used to animate them flowing back into Naruto through ribbons of purple mist. Karin was going from person to person, running a diagnostic technique over them to make sure they were okay. I apologize for the rather hostile manner in which you were all retrieved. However, time is of the essence, and I would prefer that you not make a fuss and draw attention, alerting Otogakure to what I'm about to do. As an apology for most likely destroying all belongings and money, I will personally escort everyone around the elemental countries until they find a place to stay after the attack is over. You will all be adequately protected while I fight, and while you will be able to see the fighting, you will not be able to harm or harm others outside of this circular area. All sound will be turned off as well. The only reason you'll be able to see is so you're not kept waiting, though I strongly advise you not to watch. Brutal does not even begin to describe what will occur. Shrugging them off, he motioned for Pain and Karin to remain within the circle before stepping out of it. Almost as an afterthought, he looked back to the refugees, as he had already begun calling them, and ran a hand through his hair, flicking his head towards them. Several small seeds glinted in the sunlight as they landed, growing into a large field of edible items. Of course, the colors and tastes were off, looking more like a horror show or a display of demonic plants than a field of other fruits and vegetables. And the taste, he still hadn't gotten the electrified glass taste out of them, so he figured they'd have to make do. He summoned several hundred globules of water to cover the human need to stay hydrated, keeping them afloat in the air, and allowing them to constantly absorb more water from the atmosphere for a refill. Nobody had ever mentioned him being able to grow things similar to the first Hokage's bloodline, which surprised the refugees. While they were busy preventing their minds from melting, Naruto raised his hand and used his index finger to trace several glyphs and runes he learned from his grimoire in the air, using them to assist in channeling his power. The very fabric of reality seemed to pucker before smoothing out again, and a very faint silvery barrier erected itself in the trench dug by the wind knife. To throw a weapon, use a ninjutsu, or attempt a genjutsu, one must bypass the vacuum and lack of gravity of space, creating an impenetrable barrier that allows you to see but not hear or do anything else. You're all enclosed in a sphere, completely isolated from the air above you, the ground below you, and even me out here. With his protection restored, he turned to face the open plains once more and waved his hand in a shooing gesture, scattering pure white embers in a cone formation, setting the plains ablaze with a wash of heat and light. As the fire burned its way through the plains, he began to gather his mana for an enormous spell, enlarging Kyuubi to 10 feet at the head before writing dozens of glyphs and runes in the air. He sliced his right hand through the air, discharging all the accumulated mana, blazing like a violet lamp in an evening sky, his hair floating about him like tendrils of an affectionate plant. They were his primary ground force, towering at 10 feet, and with a leg span of over 30 feet, capable of spinning webs of slick mud, injecting molten magma for venom, and emerging from the ground at will. A swarm of 50 wind moths and butterflies emerged from the air, capable of stirring up gusts seeded with wind blades, shedding wind blade scales off their wings, and reforming and dispersing at will. They were his supporting air force. They were tertiary air force, formed from water in the air itself. They were nearly 10 feet long from tail to tip, shaped vaguely eel-like, and had 6 legs on their underside. They could embrace and crush those caught within their bodies, and use their small legs to inject part of their body into their target to attack them from within. 50 vaguely humanoid aberrations appeared from lightning, 8 feet tall and boasting an unnaturally long arm length to near their knees. They were agile and quick, supporting ground fire. 50 wasps crafted out of crystalline shards and capable of spitting globs of liquid frost at a distance of 20 feet, as well as being able to reform if shattered, emerged from frost. 50 large slugs, measuring about 6 feet long and 3 feet high, were crafted out of liquid and gelatinous flame, oozed trails of fire along their path, and could spit globs of liquid flame at a distance of 20 feet. Finally, from nature came the medical crew, 50 vaguely humanoid shapes with willowy body forms and lanky figures crafted out of a very violently poisonous herb. They were to cultivate the land while fighting, ensuring that the battlefield was not desecrated by the battle, and ensuring that no matter what, new life would always grow even after such a disaster. As his mana threads set aside for each element were currently being used to sustain the army, Naruto would be casting utility spells, sand magic, and non-elemental abilities. 352 troops fought against nearly 8,000 ninjas. You had to feel sorry for Oto at this point. The black mage rested his back against Kyuubi for a moment, breathing heavily from exerting so much mana at once. He caught his breath after only a few moments, and raised a single hand to the charred plains. Kyuubi, use your Yauki to launch yourself into the village. Earth spiders, prepare to intercept the first wave of retaliatory ninja. Infiltrate through the hole, lightning dancers, and destroy their communications. Pollute and poison their water supply, water insects. Everyone else, please help the earth spiders. The plush doll gathered crimson Yauki to the tips of each of his tails before pointing them at an angle, and blasting a hole down into the ground, easily over 20 feet wide and 30 tall. The walls, floor, and ceiling of the tunnel became instant glass from the high heat coming from the Yauki as it ate away at Otogakure's metal roof, punching through the layers in seconds. Oto was clearly not designed to withstand a Biju attack. Several squads of Chunin, a few Jounin, and an ANBU squad who had apparently been nearby flooded out of the hole, their sandals beginning to melt on the still heated glass surfaces of the tunnel, but they trudged on regardless, sealing for ninjutsu, genjutsu, and preparing weapons as they ran to the light. They were met by 2 spiders stationed at the entrance, each grabbing 2 nins and biting them viciously, using their claw-tipped legs to slash and stab at the one they weren't currently injecting with magma. Humanoid lightning elementals jumped, tumbled, and skittered through the glass tunnel, shocking and numbing those who got too close as 80% of the lightning force surged down into Oto, shutting down all electrical systems. 60% of the water squad floated serenely after them, intent on destroying any liquid supplies within the village, catching, strangling, crushing, and killing anyone in their path on their way to the reservoir and other bodies of water. The earth above the village's roof began to sublime, for lack of a better word, disintegrate into sand that floated lazily into the air, slowly obscuring the sun. Within 10 minutes, the plains had turned into a 100-foot hole from repeated Yauki blasts into Otogakure, and counterattacks from the village were expected at any moment. Suddenly, from the back, a volley of kunai broke through the tree cover, having been thrown by a squad of ninja who had sneaked out of a different exit and come to flank. Unfortunately, they either ignored or didn't see the floating cloud of sand. With winds of over 200 miles per hour, the sand grains were devouring flesh, clothing, armor, and even trees. The retaliatory army had arrived, and it was armed to the teeth with ninjutsu. The battlefield was in chaos, with their flank protected by a flaying sandstorm. The elemental army struck in organized squads to crush the resistance, utilizing each squad to the best of its ability. Naruto was in the thick of it, his sand protecting and fighting for him alternately. Sand spines erupted from a very thin layer on the ground, impaling feet and hindering movement. Finally, a group of Oto Jounin worked together to perform 4 Daten, Ritsudo Tensho, squishing 2 earth spiders, shattering 3 frost wasps, and suffocating a flame slug. Unfortunately for them, the wasps simply reformed from the shards. The earth spiders absorbed the earth used against them and grew bigger, and the flame S. With the elemental army firmly opposing elemental techniques, the nins resorted to their specialty, ninjutsu with a sound style. Sound fracture waves echoed across the battlefield in cone areas of effect, cracking and breaking parts of the soldiers off, only to be reattached by nature medics and bound with elastic vines while the wound healed. In retaliation for the technique that nearly killed his army, Naruto caused the sand cloud to rain javelins of hardened sand, which passed harmlessly through his soldiers except for the frost wasps, but were extremely effective against the human opposition. They obviously did not enjoy being impaled like a butterfly on a pin. Kyuubi leapt from squad to squad of enemy resistance, biting, clawing, and pounding with his tails, occasionally tossing a ball of chaotic yauki from the tip of one of his tails, the corrosive energy decaying and corrupting flesh, soil, or armor wherever it touched. The Hokage arrived within 30 minutes of decimating the squads that were sent directly into his encampment of nearly 300 soldiers. Recent deaths. Naruto, Episode 15. Otogakure, a little more than 300. Orochimaru's Sound 5 and Uchiha Sasuke followed him to the battlefield. Kimamaro took a little longer to die because his Shiketsumiyaku bloodline severely strengthened his skeletal structure. An earth spider had to bite him and inject him full of magma, liquefying him from the inside out before he died. Orochimaru and Sasuke were taken aback when they saw the Otokage's vanguard killed within the first 45 seconds of combat because they couldn't activate their curse seals while on the move. Apparently soulless constructs were less forgiving of dramatic tension than human opponents who would wait for obligatory power-up sequences. Sasuke activated his Sharingan, choosing to stand back and watch his mentor and his nemesis engage in combat. And the legion of elemental soldiers split before Orochimaru without him even needing to attack, leading the Snake Sannin to believe that Naruto was controlling them, even if only slightly. A blurred seal sequence led into a Shikumi no Jutsu as soon as an opportunity presented itself. The powerful illusion disoriented the Black Mage for only a moment as he effortlessly broke it. But the moment was all the Snake Sannin needed to lunge forward, non-magical replica of the Kusanagi in hand, and land a glancing blow off the white-haired teen's shoulder, cutting into the sand. In retaliation, several spines and spikes of sand exploded into existence at point blank, forcing Orochimaru to jump back to avoid being impaled. The Black Mage turned to face him before deliberately closing his eyes, arms above his head as violet energy pulsed into being once more. Out of the sky rained balls of non-elemental energy and globs of virulent toxin. With his eyes still closed, the grass around his feet began to wilt, and Orochimaru felt a strange tingling sensation dance across his skin, which he ignored and launched into more ninjutsu, primarily throwing fire, wind, and earth techniques. Wind blades were deflected and dispersed, flames were smothered by sand, and earth chunks were sublimed to feed the sand cloud. The elemental constructs, bound to Naruto's will, immediately switched tactics to the new battlefield before the forest of sand had stopped forming. Sasuke hopped backwards to keep watching, copying all of Orochimaru's jutsu, and cheering on the inside that the dobe was good enough to get his mentor to dig into the stuff he hadn't been taught yet. The snake Sannin wasn't done yet, summoning swarms of snakes from his sleeves to combat the sand manipulating menace, only to have the summoned animals smothered, crushed, or simply blocked by the sand. The only warning for the counterattack was the sandstorm blocking the flank stilling before whipping into a frenzied fury towards Orochimaru. Unable to flee, he weathered the flaying sand particles, splitting his body along his mouth, and emerging unscathed before sinking into the ground and using the Haru Bansho, Boka no Jutsu to avoid the deadly storm. He stabbed upward as he reappeared behind the black mage, hoping to skewer the pest through the ribcage, but the sword in his hand was caught and shattered into small metal slivers by compacted sand. He was caught off guard as a spike of hardened sand impaled him through the gut while gawking at his ruined weapon, only for Orochimaru to be an earth clone. Naruto made his observation aloud, somehow heard above the din of the ongoing battle. You appear to be a cockroach rather than a snake, Orochimaru. Should we see if you can survive 14 days without your head? Orochimaru bit his thumb and swiped it down his arm, over the snake summoning tattoo, enraged by the slight against his title. Kuchiyos no Jutsu is a summoning technique. A massive puff of smoke distracted everyone except the human resistance, resulting in more casualties because the elemental automatons had no use for curiosity or surprise. Kyuubi lumbered over to stand by Naruto as they waited for Orochimaru to emerge from the cloud of smoke. Drawn by the scent of snake as well as the giant puff of smoke, that man had far too much love for dramatic suspense. Kyuu-kun Orochimaru has arrived, indicating that forbidden magic is now legal. How many kills do you have? The fox snorted, grinning blood-soaked teeth before responding. Your elemental army has killed about 1,000 people, but you've lost about 50. I've taken out about $500. You, the black mage responded almost absent-mindedly, applauding Manda. About 350. That sandstorm is quite fierce, you know. But after I kill Orochimaru, I'll start using the good stuff. Should we consider them kills for both of us, since you're assisting me in channeling the magic? The fox nodded in agreement before bounding off to increase his kill rate even further, leaving Naruto to deal with the snake boss and its summoner, Manda, who was clearly displeased to be summoned in a battlefield of monsters of all things, and made it clear in a booming voice. Orochimaru, you moron. Nothing but that one brat is to be sacrificed here. The snake summoner attempted to bargain in order to appease his arrogant and stubborn summon. Take him out, and I'll meet you in an orphanage. A big orphanage. This offer appeared to please the snake boss, who tilted his head in thought before nodding, almost flinging his summoner off at the same time. Almost, they turned to the black mage, only to find a mongoose crafted from the entire sand cloud staring back at them with soulless eyes, and it was at this point that Manda would have started sweating, if he had sweat glands. The fight between the two began viciously, with the mongoose lunging at speeds unheard of for a behemoth of that size, only to hit air as Manda narrowly avoided the attack of his race's mortal enemy. Orochimaru, on the other hand, was knocked off from the high-speed duel, but was able to land safely on the ground by using his tongue as a grappling hook on nearby trees to swing to safety. As soon as he landed safely, he was confronted by a murderous black mage, who had 5 orbs of non-elemental energy swirling above his head, picking up centrifugal force while his fingernails oozed corrosive green slime. With his replacement Kusanagi destroyed, he had no choice but to fight the white-haired teen hand-to-hand, blocking against Naruto's forearms and elbows to avoid being splashed. One of the orbs of white light flung itself at him when he was unprepared, the explosion of concussive force ripping off a leg, which was easily regenerated by shedding his skin. He was much more cautious of those pretty lights after that. They traded blows, with the black mage sand clothing absorbing most of the blunt force of the punches and kicks, though a rib or two might have been bruised. Taking a risk, Naruto inhaled deeply and exhaled a toxic cloud of air, causing the top layers of skin on the snake summoner who had been buffeted by it to rapidly decay, causing Orochimaru to make a tactical retreat and lick his wounds. Some distance away, Jiraiya, Tenten, and Ino were currently on patrol near Oto territory, and had noticed the commotion coming from near Otogakure, and thus felt the need to investigate. What they were not expecting was to see an army of monstrous aberrations waging war on Oto shinobi, with a not-so-familiar white head of hair at the center facing off against a definitely familiar black head of high. aside from the Girl Scouts, whose cookie-selling gimmicks would frighten the poor snake summoner. Jiraiya grinned as he pulled out his handy telescope to figure out who White Hair was, causing Tenten and Ino to both question his sanity until he spoke. Naruto's kicking Orochimaru in the shins. Both were skeptical until they looked through the telescope, and Tenten, with her keen eyesight, noticed something else. Look at that. There are refugees, I believe, behind that wall that occasionally flashes a light silver. After looking, Jiraiya confirmed that there were indeed refugees, and they quickly proceeded towards the refugees to ensure that they were all okay and, hopefully, to gain a better understanding of what was going on. As they approached the wall, they noticed a doctor or a laboratory assistant performing triage on what appeared to be quite a few Konoha nin who were Mia, as well as nins from other countries. Ino immediately began going through hand seals for a medic technique, before Jiraiya stopped her with a hand on her shoulder and spoke. There's a barrier here that I've never seen before. We won't be able to enter until whoever built it lowers it. Taking out a large scroll, the Toad Sannin began writing a message across it, asking who put up the barrier, and if they needed any medical assistance. Karin, who hadn't noticed them until they were right outside the barrier, scrawled a reply in the ground that Naruto made the barrier, and that they did need medical assistance, badly. Karin was running low on chakra, and several of the prisoners of war would die within a few hours without additional help. An arrogant voice sounded from behind them just as they were about to doodle a response. Weak Konoha nins, who are you? Tenten immediately plucked several senbon from special pockets inside her sleeves and pants that had a disproportionate amount of 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 disproportionate amount of a 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 disproportionate amount of a. Sasuke jumped up to avoid being caught in the collateral of the ground shifting, but was nailed in the calf with an electrified senbon, though he was able to avoid all the others. He pulled the needle out, blinked rapidly as he realized his calf was numb from the specific voltage channeled through the needle, before staring back at them, his two tomo sharing and swirling sluggishly. Before he could make another witty remark, the two women attacked in perfect synchronization, taking care not to use any specific taijutsu style or jinjutsu, instead relying on chakra manipulation or elemental manipulation to prevent the bloodline from copying their techniques. Ino took to the ground, bouncing off the rubble of the rocks stirred by her stomp, executing a chaotic form of taijutsu used by stringing together random moves she learned over the years, augmented with the strength technique. Realizing that she'd end up harming the environment more often than hitting Sasuke, she switched to chakra no mesu, and switching from strong, straight attacks to more agile swipes. Tenten was raining electrified needles from every direction, using her incredible hand-eye coordination to control up to 10 needles per finger, and she would have started pulling bombs, kusarigama, katanas, and possibly a large mallet or two out of her pockets instead if she thought she would have a better chance of hitting the wayward Uchiha with them. Unfortunately, it appears that Orochimaru had intensively trained Sasuke in flexibility. Lots of flexibility. If nothing else, let it be said that the Snake Sannin is the best at flexibility, and thus taught it to his apprentice. Or at least tried to. He had good flexibility, but lacked the body modifications that Orochimaru had, putting him just below a good gymnast, and much less than a contortionist. However, he was able to predict and avoid most strikes by using his Sharingan. The numb calf muscle was impeding his movement, but he was working around it. With Naruto chasing Orochimaru through the forest, he caught up with him near the sealed sphere housing the refugees, as well as the Toad Sannin who was observing the barrier, and Ino and Tenten double-teaming Sasuke. Getting tired of the Snake Sannin's ability to shed his skin, he reached into thin air, and withdrew the modified original Kusanagi, aiming for a final shot against the Snake Sannin with his own weapon. Instead of the original shape of a hiltless sword, he had shaped it into a double-ended javelin with lethally poisoned tips reminiscent of the Kusanagi, measuring about 7 feet from tip to tip and well-balanced for both melee combat and throwing. He simply required a distraction. An absolutely diabolical smile split his face as if a light clicked in his head, instantly setting Jiraiya on edge. He called out in a breathy, flirtatious voice, schooling his face into the appropriate role to play for this distraction. Sasuke-kun, your shining-haired knight has arrived to rescue you from the evil clutches of Orochimaru. This, of course, confused and horrified Sasuke, and positively enraged the Snake Sannin. After all, he worked hard to get Sasuke's body in his clutches. There's no way he's going to lose his prize for some walk-in with shiny hair. Kyuubi bounded out of the undergrowth, sensing he would be needed for something fun, just as Orochimaru pulled off his last resort, attempting to take either Sasuke or Naruto's body as his own. Fushi Tensei. The two targeted by the ability's perception of the world faded to black as Orochimaru's soul discarded its mortal coil, appearing in all its glory, in the form of a large snake made up of many smaller snakes, which were obviously the souls of those he had body jumped. He charged forward, attempting to force one of the two into submission, but failed horribly when a single word split the silence, heard even by those not experiencing the ability. Flare, non-elemental energy gathered around the soul, forcing it into the visible spectrum before forcing its way into the soul body, destabilizing while inside and completely destroying the snake summoner's soul, leaving nothing from the unstable energy. While Sasuke was still in shock that his mentor had been not killed but completely erased from existence, Naruto spit a large glob of corrosive liquid directly onto the wayward Uchiha's crotch, preventing any new Uchiha children from being born. Naruto smirked at Kyuubi, savoring the screams of the one person who could truly harm him before speaking above the high-pitched shrieking. "Kyu-kun, I believe we're finished here. The final assault is being planned." They set off at a blurring pace, air knives carving a deep trench all around the battlefield, but excluding the current refugee encampment, making sure to capture all borders of Otogakure, and arrive back at the starting point within 10 minutes, listening to the continuing sounds of battle with the elemental automatons. Without saying anything, he began quickly drawing glyphs and runes in the air, erecting another barrier via space-time. The sheer amount of manipulation required to create this new barrier caused the fabric of reality to bunch up uncontrollably for a split second before smoothing out as the unbreakable barrier was set below, on either side, and in a ring far up into the sky, through the atmosphere. The first barrier erected around the refugees fell, allowing Ino to assist Karin in stabilizing and healing the patients who remained injured, though everyone still conscious turned to look at the black mage as power began to flow off of him. His eyes glowed brightly in the afternoon sunlight, his clothing whipping around in an unknown gale as his hair began to rise, not to float behind him, but to fly straight up from the energy gathering. Attracted by the familiar feeling, balls of multicolored light coalesced into familiar humanoids, their souls allowed to exist in the real world for a time due to the sheer power of this last spell. Naruto began to sing an ancient song that his guardian had once sung as a lullaby as a twinkling light began to grow in the sky. Ayue. Kyuubi entered, having recognized the melody. Nabom knew. Both sang in unison. Renmiri. The twinkling became brighter as the shape became spherical and resembled a second sun. Yajayogo. Lulu and the others joined in the song as the falling meteor caught fire in the atmosphere. Hased Kenny. They all ended the song with a sense of finality, just before the meteor slammed into the remains of Otogakure, obliterating it. Tsurame. Everyone was stunned, even Sasuke, who had stopped screaming to stare in awe as the action registered in their minds. Naruto had taken a star from the sky and used it to destroy a village. As their minds tried to recover from the blue screen of death, Naruto turned to Lulu and the others, murmuring a Lulu Akasan before collapsing against Kyuubi, who pulled him up and set him on the fox's back. She bent down and kissed her apprentice on the forehead, murmuring a simple "I'll always love you, Naruto-kun" before they all faded away, proud smiles the last to vanish. He drew his hand through his completely white hair, flinging a large assortment of seeds into the air, which was then carried via a strong breeze to pepper the devastated area, devoid of all life after impact. He sent a strong pulse of mana through the seeds, jolting them into growth so that the area would regenerate. We will rest tonight and allow those of you with debilitating wounds to recover enough mobility to leave tomorrow to escort you back to your home villages. Please inform the children when they wake up that they are no longer required to return to Otogakure. I'll be sleeping on Kyuubi if you need me. After removing the Akatsuki ring from the obliterated Orochimaru, the plush doll, and Black Mage went to a quiet spot in the grove of trees, laying down among the children after a quick water spell to clean off the blood. Pain, who had eluded Jiraiya, sat in a branch and leaned against the trunk of the tree above Naruto, shaking his head in numb amusement and muttering to himself. And to think, all he wanted was the hat.
I will continue the story in next part. Till then, we weeb offline.